Hayek foresaw the rise of Bitcoin. He foresaw the rise of non-government money in the 70s and using technology. He understood this. And yet no one's talking about this as the counterweight to when Janet Yellen comes out and testifies and says that the federal debt doesn't matter. You know, there's so much economic illiteracy that no one pushed back. What she's espousing when she says that is that she believes in modern monetary theory. And of course, look what the Fed did under her reign.
Right. So maybe what's happening now is that there's a nouveau wave of people who are kind of thinking about Austrian economics, and Bitcoin is representative of that in a big way as well, I think, right? And yes. So maybe that's kind of like the extremes of the pole. You know, our MMT on this side and Austrian on this side. And so maybe that's why people are thinking about that in this way. And I think those are some really interesting questions for people to think about in practical terms, right? So,
yeah.
So then once you started to kind of open that up, what happened then? Like, how did you decide to put that into action?
Well, I started to see in 2012 in some of the chat rooms and email groups that I was part of, that Bitcoin started to bubble up. And then I really dug in. It was Jeffrey Tucker who sent out an email to his liberty.me email group. It is starting to explain Bitcoin. And I respected his work. And so I finally decided to dig in. It just so happened that I actually had a surgery at the time. I was flat on my back and really dug in early 2013, in a way that caused me to actually set up my first Bitcoin wallet back then. And then I started to go down the rabbit hole. And what I find is that when most people go down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, they rarely come back out. If you really go down the rabbit hole, because you start to see that it is incredibly powerful to decentralize power away from governments and away from companies back to the individual.
Yeah.
And it cannot be corrupted. Back then, it could. It was so nascent and not decentralized yet. In fact, actually, I just came from a regulatory conference at Wharton on Friday, and there was a professor from it's a Chatham House rule, so I won't disclose who it was. But this person is not an economist, not a Bitcoiner by ideology. He's a computer scientist, and he started to look at objective ways to measure decentralization. And back in 2011, 2012, there were so few people who were using and who were running nodes on the Bitcoin network that if the U.S. government wanted to shut it down back then, it could have. It could have taken over enough nodes and executed a 51% attack. At this point, it's so decentralized that it can't. And this person's research, and I hope he publishes it, it essentially is proving what I intuitively knew, which is that Bitcoin became truly decentralized around 2014. And that, by the way, it happens to be when Bernanke testified during his Humphrey Hawkins testimony up on Capitol Hill, and somebody asked him about Bitcoin. And he said, well, that's an interesting technology. Well, that's right about when a lot of mainstream people said, all right, they're not going to ban it. Let's go. And back then, Overstock.com put a pay with Bitcoin button on its website. And a lot of us early Bitcoiners bought all of our Christmas presents that year on Overstock.com because he rolled it out right before the Christmas season. Those were, in retrospect, very, very, very expensive Christmas presents. But all of us were just bootstrapping the network back then. And so I don't look at it that way. I look at it as an investment in the long term for, frankly, the next generations of Americans who are going to have the benefit of the fact that this network got bootstrapped by a lot of people early on, from computer scientists to gamers to the liberty movement, who all in those early years made Bitcoin decentralized. And in that 2012 to 2014 period, which is when I started to get it involved, that's when it became decentralized and you really had an explosion of network effects. And at this point, it cannot be corrupted by a government that wants to take it over. In fact, what we're seeing is that probably on a stealth basis, more governments are getting involved with it.
Right.
They're recognizing the power of it.
Right.